Welcome into another episode of the Swamp247 Recruiting Show. My name's Jacob Rudner alongside Swamp247 Recruiting Analyst Blake Alderman. And Blake, this is the show of all shows, I suppose, for the Swamp247 Recruiting Podcast. Florida's early signing day period started December 21st. We are recording this in the afternoon on December 22nd. Gators bring in 20 true freshmen. They signed them all on December 21st, which was the first day of that early signing period. And here we are now, I guess, to assess everything that's gone on with Florida's recruiting, dating all the way back from when this staff took over to, their first true signing day, that bump class signing day. I guess I'll take your initial thoughts first. Again, 20 true freshmen signed, plus you have Tony Livingston, who was a 2022 gray shirt officially announced yesterday, plus transferred defensive lineman Caleb Banks. So 22 players in total on the first day, National Signing Day of the early signing period. What are your thoughts overall on this group?
I think from top to bottom, I think that they obviously hit a lot of needs. You obviously, look at Florida's quarterback room. Guy like Jaden Rashada, 5-star quarterback, certainly the route you want to take, whenever you're trying to raise the talent level in that room, being able to add a 5-star talent like that, that's what the doctor ordered, on top of just the talent he has from on paper with stars and rankings and whatnot. You look at the stats, he's a guy that, is a throw first guy, but has some wheels if he needs to get out of the pocket. I think there's a lot of pieces of his game that obviously fit into what you want to do offensively if you're Florida. So, this isn't just a guy where Florida just took a 5-star quarterback and it looks great on paper, but he doesn't quite fit schematically what you want to do. I mean, this is one that checks off all the boxes on all fronts. I think wide receiver, you look at the wide receiver room in general, Florida it was dealing with the injury bug this season that just passed, and you could kind of see the depth issues there. I think overall, you look at that wide receiver room and, maybe outside of Ricky Pearsall, you didn't really see any of those guys really get a lot of separation. You could see that there lacked overall speed. Maybe there's some guys that are, red zone type guys, possession type guys, those bigger body guys that still move fairly well, but just don't have that breakaway speed. You bring in Aiden Mizell, you bring in Andy Jean, you bring in Eugene Wilson III. All those guys are really, maybe more so Wilson and Mizell are more speed guys. They have track speed. That's one area where I really like, offensively that they hit on well. Offensive line, I think that they did an okay job overall. I think whenever you look at, their class of Najee Harris, Roderick Kearney, and Bryce Lovett, I obviously they've got, a guy in Lovett that is probably more of a flexibility guy, can play some guard, can play some tackle. Whereas, Harris and Kearney are more of those interior type of guys, whether they be guards or centers or whatnot. So, I think whenever you look at the offensive line, I would have liked to see them address the offensive tackle position a little bit harder. I think that's one area where they needed to get better at. Some of those guys, where you look at them on paper, you see the size, even watching film of how they move. There isn't one guy that's a certified, day one, even, guy that's going to come in and make an early impact at that tackle position. So, I think that's one area where you would want to address that in the portal. If not, that's going to carry an even bigger need over to the 2024 cycle. Running back, it seemed like they wanted to land 2 this cycle. You get a guy in Treyon Webb who really fits that power run, zone run, types of kind of running style that what you've seen Billy Napier want to do with running back. So, they've already have offered a guy that's in the portal, so they're obviously looking around and, making sure that, that they still do their due diligence in that running back room. With tight end, Tony Livingston is one guy that does carry over from the 2022 cycle to, this cycle where he'll be there this coming spring, being a gray shirt, which means that, yes, he's a 2022 signing. He was a guy that was, in that class, had signed his letter of intent with Florida, but being a gray shirt meant that he would academically start his college career off, whether that be at Florida or at, a community college or somewhere closer to home, taking those credits and getting things done academically, but wouldn't join the team until the semester after. So instead of the fall, he'll be there this coming spring. So he'll be there in January for Florida to join the team and, really start his athletic clock whenever he does enroll there in the spring. On the defensive side, defensive tackle, big area of need for Florida. You could tell whenever you see the numbers that they have in the class that was a big area of focus. I think they've done a great job getting guys that, can come in and make an early impact, whether it be a guy like Kelby Collins, who we've talked about on this show plenty of times. We're a guy that, he's a guy that we're very high on with his ability to move around the defensive line. I think if you could be kind of picky there. Obviously you add Caleb Banks there too, who's a guy that measured 6'7", 10 pounds. Somewhat over 300 pounds whenever he took that official visit to Florida. That's someone that certainly seems like he has the length to move around, but could have the weight there to play on the interior part. But I think top to bottom, Florida's roster needs defensive tackle was a big need for them. As far as the high school ranks early, I think Will Norman seems like the only guy that really kind of fits that defensive tackle, true, nose 3 technique, part of that interior part there. So I think if you're being a little stickly there, that's probably one area where you would have liked to see them do better. Obviously you miss on a guy like Jordan Hall who went to Georgia. You're not able to flip John Walker from UCF, you signed with them on the first day of the early signing period. You could tell Florida was still looking for some interior guys on that defensive line, and they weren't able to do that. So linebacker, Jaden Robinson was the only guy there. I thought that was an area where they could have really improved a lot of things at there. There were some guys that, this cycle that they kicked the tires on, but you never really saw them. Some you went all go for. Florida obviously was trying to flip Blake Bryant through the fall there. Things seemed to kind of fall off there as it got closer to signing day. There were just some guys that they never really seemed to be pushing for full go. Which was kind of a head scratcher for me as far as, just the needs you have in that room. So portal is one area where I think you'll see them address that area going forward, to try to bolster that up from the spring. And certainly that's going to carry over to the 2024 cycle. Defensive back, I'm including all these guys together because that defensive back class is, it's rather large. There's a lot of guys. Really was another area of focus between corner, safety, guys that can play in the nickel there. So they really hit on a lot of things there. So I think overall from top to bottom, you look at the class, first and foremost, they hit on a lot of areas of need. Could they have done a little bit better of, maybe filling out a couple more? Absolutely. Sure. I think from one area, you saw, I guess from past cycles where I've seen some commitments there, I'm like, man, they really took this guy now, or they took this guy in general. There really weren't too many head scratchers. Or, if there were very few this cycle. I can't really think of any off the top of my head where I'm like, well, why are they taking this guy? Like, this guy should not be here. So I think that you look at their class, I really like the balance they have there. I don't think they really took any major stretches in this class of what I've seen in the past and some, from covering Florida recruiting. I think probably one of the biggest criticisms top to bottom is, the lack of, those 5-star, yes, Jade Rashada is a 5-star guy, but I think just a deeper class of, more top 100 guys, more 5-star firepower, the elites in that class.
Sure.
If you want to continue to compete, not only in the SEC, but just in the country with how, you see the usual suspects that make the college football playoffs. They're the ones who are usually at the top of the college football recruiting rankings. So if Florida wants to turn the corner and recruit well, recruiting good is great. That's fine. But if you recruit great, that's how you get those elite players, because you can, develop those elite players into, really big time players that help you make a college football playoff run.
No doubt about it. And I think the big thing for me is that this is a fine class. I would go as far as to call it a fine class. I think that there are areas of great strength, which you outlined. I think that the defensive back room, despite missing on a guy like Cormani McLean, is very good. I think that Jaden Rashada is a very strong addition. We've talked about him plenty. Kelby Collins is a very good player. For me, the big thing with this class, I feel like there was something left to be desired towards its end, towards the finish. And if you go over to swamp247.com, I think that that's something that's kind of dominated the conversation to a degree. In recent weeks, it's how Florida closed out. Guys like Mark Fletcher picking Miami, Jordan Hall, who you mentioned, going to a place like Georgia. And while I think that leaves something to be desired as we move forward with this new coaching staff, I would also say that it places an immediate emphasis on the transfer portal. Like you said, there is a great need at several positions for Florida to bolster its roster via transfer, whether that's inside linebacker. That's a place that's very thin. Outside linebacker is exceptionally thin. Isaiah Nixon mutually parted ways. Florida's class ends up at UCF. That was a guy who profiled as somebody who ends up in that jack linebacker, outside linebacker position. They only have 3 scholarship guys on the roster there right now. That's an incredibly thin room that is in need of an immediate infusion of talent. So do I think that this was a good group? Yes. Number 12 overall in 2023 recruiting, it's 5th in the SEC. And I think that leaves something to be desired. Do I think it's bad? No, I don't think
blue chip ratio is really good in the class for sure. Blue chip ratio is great. So like I guess the trend that we have seen from past, to recent football recruiting cycles, just under Florida is you've seen some of those guys where you miss on, maybe A, B, and C target, and you start to move down to the bottom of the barrel. I know that sounds mean, but you start to take those guys just to take a guy, just to take him. And I don't think there was any panic there for that. Again, the transfer portal does become more of a thing. So, I think that could be just an area where you can obviously fall back on. But, I agree with everything you're saying as far as, they needed some more of that firepower in this class. But, I think one thing is just the blue chip average is really good. I haven't, at least from memory, can't remember any in recent history that have been as good as what they're looking at right now.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's my point. I think that this is a good group. I think that it's balanced in terms of, you don't have a lot of those guys within the class who are question marks or even project type players. I think that the balance in terms of guys who are whose potential is really strong coming out of high school, who fit that blue chip ratio is impressive. I would also give a lot of credit to the staff for how well it recruited its footprint. I know that was a conversation in the latter years of the Mullen tenure. We joke about it all the time over at Swamp247. Right. And we joke like that, but it is important for Florida to be able to dominate, within its 500-mile radius. A lot of the most successful teams nationally are able to do that before they start to go national in terms of their reach. And they bring the best players from their area and they get them on campus and they keep them there. So I think that Florida could do a better job recruiting the state of Florida? Of course, there were several prospects from the state who I think fans would have loved to have seen end up in the class. Do I think that Florida failed in its footprint? By no means at all. No. I think that this was a really solid first showing within the state of Florida, within that 500-mile radius. And overall, again, I think it was solid. We've seen a lot of reactions where people are like, this is a super underwhelming group. I couldn't disagree more. I think that this is a fine group, if not a good group. I think that there are some real bright spots in this class. I think that they brought in a group of players who have the potential to contribute quite early, which brings me to my next topic. Billy Napier did not comment when asked during his press conference on the first day of signing day, December 21st. Somebody asked him how many guys he expects of this freshman crop to contribute right away. And it's a conversation that will hold quite important as the 2023 season gets closer, because the amount of attrition Florida has had within its roster will force a lot of these guys to have to play, two deep type roles, critical reserve roles. My question for you and your analysis, how many guys here do you think are real contributors right away? Who should we be watching as spring ball rolls through, especially with 18 early enrollees, which you wrote about? Who should we keep an eye on?
I think whenever you look, Florida has landed a commitment from Wisconsin quarterback transfer Graham Mertz. You saw what Jack Miller did in the bowl game. There was some struggles in that game. I think you have to mention Jaden Rashada. I don't think in a perfect world or an ideal situation, this is maybe out of the gate, unless there's just he has to just crush it this spring, because he'll be there for an early enrollee. I think that would be one to where, you would probably want to count on some of the guys that have been there, transfer portal guys like Mertz, before you throw in a true freshman like that, especially when you start off the season next year on the road against Utah. But I think that just the way the room is shaped up, if Jack Miller isn't the guy, if Graham Mertz doesn't work out, I don't think it's crazy by any means to see that Jaden Rashada gets some spin in that, in that offense as a freshman, whether that be making an appearance in some type of reserve position earlier in the season, whether he takes the reins by whatever unforeseen circumstance down the season, as things continue. So I think he's one to watch for sure, so that's one guy off the top of my head. Kelby Collins, I think, is another guy. Whenever you look at, again, we mentioned that, Florida probably could have a little bit better of a job on that interior part of the defensive line. Kelby Collins has that versatility to where you can move him around. Another guy that's going to be an early enrollee. So those are the guys, first and foremost, early enrollees are the ones that usually make the earlier impact if you're going to play a freshman. That's just how it is. Unless you're like coming in, as a, certified, dude, so
unless you're Eugene Wilson.
Certified dog. So, that's one guy, Kelby Collins. I think Dijon Johnson, the fact that he's got that versatility, you saw where Florida really wanted to address parts in the defensive backfield. And I think that that's just a plug and play type guy that has played corner in high school. I think he projects best as a safety. I think you could probably even throw him in some nickel situations depending on, how things work out with him. So I think him being that Swiss Army knife utility type player in the secondary could trend for him to get some of that early playing time. I really do want to mention Eugene Wilson just because I think he's got that electric, playmaking, can make you miss in a phone booth type of, game that he brings. I mean, you watch his highlight tape. I mean, he is literally a walking highlight. Every play, if you have a chance to watch the senior tape, it's really good. But he's very small in stature. Is that a guy that gets hit by an SEC linebacker and gets broken half?
Sure.
That's something. Not an early enrollee type of guy. So whereas I don't think it's absolutely crazy that a guy with his dynamic playmaking ability could come in and get some spin on offense, I don't think that's completely crazy. But just there's a lot of factors, I guess, at least in my opinion, that are working against him. Jakeem Jackson, I think, is an interesting one because I normally wouldn't say that he's probably somebody that is going to come in and make an early impact. But he's going to be an early enrollee. He's a guy that is fairly new to the cornerback position. And I say that because his senior year was his first year playing as a full-time defensive guy. Yes, he did play offense as well, but, he was a wide receiver before he made that transition to where he's, being recruited as a defensive back, playing that full-time defensive back part, to where he's not a guy that's, just an offensive guy. He moves really well. I think he could be a guy that impacts, maybe in the return game on special teams. I think he's probably – whereas he comes in with a lofty ranking, he comes in and does a lot of things. I really like his game a lot. He's one of my favorite guys that's in Florida's class. I do think that he's still a bit of a project, and I say that just because he's still learning the position. Is he someone that comes in the spring, really thrives under Corey Raymond? So I maybe that's my bias showing for him just because I do really like him. I think he's one of my favorite players in the class. But I think there's just little things he does and, what he brings to the table that, I don't think it's crazy for a guy like that to come in and get some early playing time. You mentioned the jack position to where it is very thin. And I think depending on what Florida does in the portal with that, because I think that's ideally where you want to address that position. But, TJ Searcy was a guy that was recruited to play that jack position. He'll be there in the spring. I guess they'll get a chance to see how he plays in that. He's a guy that's played tight end in high school. He's played outside linebacker. He's also put his hand in the dirt as more of a 5 technique, rushing the edge type of guy. So I think that that's someone that could play out of necessity. Defensive line in general, when you look at a lot of these guys, I don't think it's completely crazy that a lot of these guys are already in early enrollees. The only guy in Florida's class right now on the defensive line that's not an early enrollee is Gavin Nix. So you're going to have all these guys at a position that you really needed some players at, that you really needed to find out who you can count on. So I don't think it's crazy at all to see any of those guys on the defensive line because it has been such a big need. They're selling that early playing time. They're all going to be early enrollees. I don't think it's crazy that you find maybe 1, 2, maybe you try gold and it's the entire group that you brought in. I doubt that, but I'm sure you can find a handful of those guys on the defensive line that are going to get in there in the spring. They're going to learn the system and they're going to be, maybe like a Chris McClellan type this past season who had to play out of necessity. Granted, in his snaps, he got better as the season went on and he's someone that they certainly could count on. But, you really don't ever want to be in a position to have to count on a true freshman, and Florida's just sadly in that position right now. So I think that it's not crazy. I feel like for defensive line, if you take those guys that are early enrolling, put a blindfold on and throw a dart, you're going to hit someone that I think is going to have to be counted on at some point.
Yeah, I think that's, really valuable analysis. One guy who I will bring up, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that I think he's going to play right away or that he's ready for it, but if we're going to talk roster situation and how, thinner position groups might force younger guys who are maybe or may not be ready into roles where they have to contribute. Jaden Robinson is kind of one of in those positions. It is extremely thin, that inside linebacker position on Florida's roster. So much so that Billy Napier actually called it a great need during signing day after adding Robinson to the class. It's still an extremely thin position. I could see, a situation where Robinson proves himself in a practice setting, shows that he's ready, and does earn some reps to a degree. And we saw that with a guy like Miguel Mitchell. So before people rule it out in the comments that he's not ready, I don't think that anybody would have gone into the 2022 season and logically told me Miguel Mitchell's a guy who's going to play in the majority of the games this season and contribute in some of them. I would have called you crazy. I think Jaden Robinson has the potential, mostly due to Florida's roster situation, to have a similar impact. And whether that's on special teams or he gets thrown out there for limited reps on defense, I could see him kind of being the Miguel Mitchell of the 2023 season. I can envision that unfolding similarly. So that will be my bonus signing class guy to throw into the hat in terms of early contributors. One thing I'm going to ask you, Blake, where does this team need to prioritize in the transfer portal? We've seen the bulk of the high school recruiting done. If there are more high school additions, it's just going to be a couple moving forward. Billy Napier said as much yesterday, but that doesn't mean they're done recruiting. And in fact, there are some great needs that still exist on this roster. Where are they, and what does this team really need to attack in order to put itself in a healthy situation moving forward?
I think linebacker, whether you're talking Jack outside linebacker guys, Mike linebackers on the inside there, I think across the board, linebacker is one of those positions. So I think that that's an area where, Jay Bateman and Mike Peterson, Florida's inside linebackers coach and outside linebackers coach, the pair of them, I think they're really going to need to take some attention in the portal there. Terada Mitchell is one guy that's had some buzz to Florida. I already have a transfer portal crystal ball in for him, the Ohio State linebacker. I have one in there. He's already in the transfer portal. I think that, that's a guy, there's a lot of confidence on Florida's side that he ends up, transferring there. He's going to take part in Ohio State's college football playoff game later this month. So we'll see whether he's a guy that makes this a quick decision after that game. The dead period for transfer portal guys ends a little earlier than high school guys. So rolling over to January 4th, these transfer guys can start taking some visits again, whether it's unofficial OVs, any of those types of things. So, linebacker across the board, I think defensive tackle, one area where they, take a look in the portal and see there, just ideally, you want to have someone in there that has some game experience at the college level. You don't want to have to count on some of these true freshmen. I think
Sure.
Florida could still very well be in a position where, some of these guys on that defensive line class from the high school ranks are going to be baptized by fire. They're going to be thrown in the mix early. Whether Florida does well in the transfer portal at defensive tackle or not, I still think that those are guys that you're going to need to count on just because of the depth that's in that room. So, edge guys, inside linebackers, defensive tackle. I think offensive tackle is an area where they need to get better at. And if there's someone in there in the portal that you feel like can make an impact for you there, I think when you look at Florida's roster, I think they're fairly set on interior type of guys between the guard and the center position from a recruiting standpoint, from what the staff previously before them that also recruited interior guys really well. So I think Florida's pretty well set there. Previous staff did not recruit offensive tackles well. Florida has struggled with some of those true offensive tackles, since they've been there. So I think that that's an area where, you could easily have a guy that comes in from the portal, kind of shores that up in there, whether it's a left tackle, right tackle. Florida's got some guys like Austin Barber, that could be, serviceable there. So I don't think that Florida's in panic mode, DEFCON 1 type situation there,
Sure.
But I do think that it's certainly an area. So, offensive tackle, linebacker across the board, defensive tackle. Those are the ones that really jump out the most to me that are probably like the biggest dire needs there. Could you get another running back out of the portal? Sure. They've obviously landed a commitment from Graham Mertz at the quarterback position. I think that you look at the turnovers that he's had and he struggled with over the career there. I don't think I'd call you insane if maybe Florida dabbles and sees what else is in there in the portal at quarterback position, but I don't know that I would put the running back and quarterback in that same category of importance as the linebacker, the defensive tackle, and the offensive tackle.
Can I give you one more? I'm going to give you one more
position. Let's hear it.
I've been posting about this over on swamp247.com on our message board, just kind of talking about the situation at this position and my thoughts on the group overall. I think that we are at a point where a transfer portal tight end would be of great benefit to this team. I think that they have the numerical depth at the position. I believe off the top of my head, they'll be at 7 scholarship players at the position or 6 scholarship players at the position. When you add Tony Livingston to the room, my issue, however, is that I don't really feel like they have a true full service player as a part of that unit who is ready to play. I think that Jonathan Odom is a guy who kind of profiles from a skill set perspective as somebody who might be able to be a reasonable blocker and a reasonable pass catching tight end. However, he suffered what appeared to be a serious knee injury in the Las Vegas Bowl that could hold him out for a considerable amount of time. I don't think that you want to go into the spring with what I would go as far as to call one-dimensional tight ends or really young tight ends. I think that Dante Zanders is a one-dimensional tight end. I think that he's a blocking type who really belongs attached and is better suited in the run game than he is in the passing attack. I would say that I was talking about this before the season with you on the podcast. Keon Zipperer to me is a guy who profiles more as a fullback than he does even as a tight end. So that just speaks directly to his strength, even though he showed off an ability to catch the football this year. I still don't think he's as true a full service player as the unit really needs, especially for how much this team likes to have a tight end out on the field in 12 personnel looks. I think that they would benefit a lot in the play action game from being able to line somebody up who is an actual receiving threat, not somebody who is, a subpar receiving threat with the ability to block. And so for me, I would prioritize that position. Do I think it was a mistake to not take a tight end on the high school side in this class? No, I don't. I think that the roster numbers were strong enough that wasn't a priority. I don't know that they were really in a good enough position with any elite prospects in order to continue to make it a priority. But that being said, it doesn't make it a reason to not go try and get somebody from the portal. I think that this is kind of a prime opportunity to replenish that spot, grow the position, add somebody who you think can contribute mostly in the passing game immediately, but also be a serviceable blocker. So I would, to the three position groups that you mentioned, I would also add tight end right up there with them. I think that this team would really benefit from a full service tight end. And with that,
and I think to add on that, sorry to cut you off. I think one thing, I think with tight end, like I agree with a lot of points you said, but I think that that's one where you maybe see how things shake out in spring ball. I haven't checked the transfer portal recently. I couldn't tell you how many tight ends are in there, haven't committed, haven't picked a school. Every time I look at the transfer portal names on 24/7 Sports, there's like 27 new more names in there. So I think from the guys I have, you mentioned Keon, you mentioned Xanders. Hayden Hanson's there. Arliss Boardingham is a guy that they're really excited about that, was hampered by some injuries this year. And I believe they've moved Andrew Savanea from the defensive side over to the tight end position as well. So that's a guy that they're, I don't know that he's seen any game reps or anything, but, he's a guy that, was getting a lot of compliments there in the spring for, just his frame. So, I think that, you bring a good point up, but, I think that there's so many unknowns with that tight end room to where, maybe see how things shake out in the spring. It didn't seem like it was a major priority, even though they did kick the tires on a guy like Jaden Platt later, who did pick Texas A&M over Florida. So, they thought it was an important enough position to get a guy that's, maybe more well-rounded in the part of, having a blocker, having a pass catcher. They thought it was important enough to kick the tires on him. So, see how that room shakes out going forward, and put it in their spring. But, I think that if you don't see some growth and you don't see some impact there, guys, that, for spring ball, I think you better be starting to look at some portal guys there whenever it comes time for that next spring boom of transfer portal guys.
And I think that that's fair. I think my point is more that if I'm the one building the roster, which I'm not, so you take what I say with a grain of salt. But if I'm Florida, I am trying to bring in a guy who doesn't really have a whole lot of that, what if factor. I think that it would be nice for this team to set themselves up to be in a position at tight end where you enter spring ball with at least one guy who you go, this is somebody who we know we can count on. We got him for this role to do this. And if you look at the room, I don't know that they have anybody like that right now. I think that there's a lot to be seen with how Xanders and Zipperer continue to develop. Odom has a major injury question right now. It could hold him out for a considerable amount of time. That even goes, for who knows how long into the future. And then everybody else in the room is really young. You have Savanea, who's technically new to the position, even if he's played it in the past. You have Boardingham, who's promising but extremely young and has no college game experience, in the SEC. You have Hayden Hanson, who's in the same boat. You have Tony Livingston, who's in the same boat. To me, that's a very uncertain room. It's not exactly a stable room. And so to me, if you're Florida and there's an opportunity to go and swoop somebody up in the portal who does have a lot of the questions answered, who has the game experience.
Got to be a dude. He's got to be a dude.
That's my point. Yeah. There's no room for them to take a question tight end again. There's no projects needed at this position. I'm saying that if somebody emerges in the transfer portal who is a legitimate tight end, who can show on tape 100%, and you set up that room to be in a position where you have at least one player when you start spring ball in March who is a sure thing or close to a sure thing. And has that game experience, whether it's in the SEC or another Power 5 school, it's on tape. The stats are there. The proof is in the pudding. They've done the work already. I think that this team would really benefit from somebody like that. And I'm not saying it's like a do or die need. I just think it's important at this point, given what the rest of the room looks like. So maybe something to watch as we get deeper and closer to spring ball with regard to another position group. I will throw it back to you one more time, Blake, before we close out the show. Any final thoughts overall with regard to this high school class, with regard to transfer recruiting? What do you have to close this out?
Yeah, I think that this class is very good. I think that recruiting good in the SEC always doesn't cut the mustard. You just look at the other teams in there. Florida has the number 12 class, and I believe they finished 5th in the SEC. So, a lot of those teams that are, ranked ahead of them are ones that pop up on the schedule. You want to close the gap with some of those teams. So I think that the feeling of this class, from a fan standpoint, I don't think you're going to find anyone that thinks this class is not good. But I think you'll see a lot of fans that feel like, getting a couple more of those elite type players totally changes the perception of what they think about this class. So, 2024, again, it's going to heat up more for portal season here between guys that are in the portal now that they're getting a look and continue to get a look. More guys that perhaps join the portal ranks whenever they, wrap up some bowl games that are coming up there. And again, Billy Napier even said after his early signing or during his early signing day press conference that whenever the early signing period and things kind of calm down to an extent, if you could even really think that recruiting does calm down at any point of the year, they're going to evaluate some of these guys from the high school ranks that did not sign early. So could they expand the board in some types of positions going forward? Again, Caden Jones, 3-star offensive tackle, is one guy that did not sign early that is on Florida's board. Yeah. He will make his decision on January 7th at the All-American Bowl, but will sign in February. So that's a guy that's still on Florida's board. But could the names expand more for that, next signing period? Who knows? They'll evaluate things there. So Florida still could have some meat on the bones there from the high school ranks. Again, we'll see where things go out from there. I think portal needs to be a big focus for them if they really want to try to flip this roster with some of these guys that, are coming in with some experience that you can, really try to improve a lot of rooms, because I think you'd be hard pressed in general to look at Florida's different position rooms and think like, yeah, they couldn't use some talent in that room. I think there's just about every position room for Florida where you could see that it's going to need to have a body, maybe 2, maybe 3, whatever, maybe 3 is getting greedy there, but I don't think there's any position where you could see that Florida could find some way to infuse that talent, whether it's raising the ceiling or raising the floor of that room. So, it's going to be interesting to see how things play out there going forward for them.
And again, as we move forward here, Florida currently 12th in 2023 recruiting on the 24/7 Sports team rankings. They bring in 22 total players. Again, that's 20 true freshmen from the 2023 class. One person who will qualify as a freshman, but was a member of that 2022 class, Tony Livingston, and Caleb Banks, the defensive line transfer from Louisville, announced as an addition along with those high schoolers on December 21st to give the Gators 22 new players, roster at 81 scholarship players if you include Graham Mertz and Mitchell, the Ohio State linebacker transfer. That will do it, though, for this episode of the Swamp 247 podcast. Before I let you go, I got to remind you, as always, head on over to swamp247.com and give us a look. We got constant flow of content, football, basketball, baseball soon, and recruiting. You can subscribe for 50% off now until January 2nd. So depending on when you listen to this podcast, you might be in luck, because if you subscribe using that deal, you also get access to Paramount Plus. And I can't imagine justifying skipping out on that, especially at 50% off. So I would encourage you again to head on over to swamp247.com and make sure you're getting that VIP access as well as Paramount Plus. And for this episode of the Swamp 247 Recruiting Show, that's going to do it. For Blake Alderman, my name's Jacob Rudner, and we will see you next time.